Okay, all right. Thank you guys so much. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here. I am a legacy wealth strategist. I've been in practice for 32 years, over 6,000 clients, and no one on my watch has ever lost a dime. My focus has been, based on my #1 best-selling book, is 3 secrets for safe money and a fabulous future. And we're going to talk about one of those today, about the catastrophic illness and the long-term care and all of those kinds of things today. And like I said, it's really fun and an honor to be here with everybody.
Thanks, Chris. And then Nancy, would you mind introducing yourself as well? Nancy May.
It'd be a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me here today. My background is a little different. I have spent well over 30 years in the corporate boardrooms across the United States and in other parts of the world, helping directors get it right. And then also advising individuals who want to get on their first public company board how to get there. In the course of time, I became the POA and trustee of my parents' well-being, which I knew I was going to sign up for probably from the time I was 5 years old, in the long story. But in the course of that, I dealt with all sorts of issues. I saw some financial issues that my parents were heading into that I couldn't handle or even get a hold of until I became their trustee in POA, and saved them from financial ruin, really, by making sure they got better quality care, reduced their cost of care by $200,000 a year, and extended the quality of their lives by about 10 years. Dad passed away at 99 just 3 years ago, and Mom was 91.
Well, thank you, Nancy. And I just think I'll dive in right now and say,
Jennifer, hold on, please. Sorry. I have so the way that we're doing this one is as a panel. So just so everyone knows, I'm going to be moderating the panel. And to tee us up, I have a couple slides to tee us up, and then I'm going to take the slides down so that the 4 of us can be on screen so that everybody can see us. I know we're doing it a little differently this time. So our session is, as you know, we kind of hinted at, long-term care planning. And here's the truth, right? Nobody wants to think about aging or becoming unable to care for oneself. And nobody wants to think about their parents becoming unable to take care of themselves. And yet 75% of us will all hit this phase of life at some point. And women are especially vulnerable to living longer lives and needing long-term care for extended periods of time as a result. And women are also especially the ones who are going to be when it comes time to assisting the elderly or sick parents or even another sick family member. Usually women are the ones who end up in that caretaking role. Statistically, that role is 2 years or longer. I would imagine it's longer. 2 years doesn't really seem like a long time. So this is really the nexus of why we're having this conversation today. It's maybe something that most of us don't want to talk about, but it's really important to talk about. That is not the right slide.
while you're getting this slide, I was going to say, even in this panel, I know Nancy, Chris, and I, so that's literally 75% of us, have all had to deal with caring for sick parents and the disruption in the life that it hasn't. And so even in this panel, the statistics.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So here it is. Sorry, that went way over to a different presentation. But here's some facts and figures. And there's more than 13.7 million. There are 13.7 million widowed people in the US, and 11 million are women. That's got to be like 80 or 90%. And women have been outdistancing men by this continually widening margin. Yeah, and represent 80% of the widowed population in the United States. 41% of women are primary breadwinners now, which is great compared to only a few decades ago when hardly any women were even in the workforce. And women are increasingly the person in a household that make most of the financial decisions, not investing decisions, which is something we're working to change. And despite all of this, despite these financial decisions, which are usually like budget and spending and groceries and things like that, 50% of women own no life insurance. So with all of that said, I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to get into the panel. All right. So can everybody see all 4 of us on screen right now?
No.
In the audience, yes. Okay. Oh, Chris, you won't. It might be a little bit different for you. So let me just. We're just gonna do it this way. Okay. Alrighty. So so here we go. So Jennifer, I know you. This is part of what you do, especially the life insurance part. And you were saying that like increasingly, like women are the CFO of the household. We're starting to be the ones that earn, sometimes we're the breadwinner, but we don't have this awareness of long-term care. So you were saying this positions us as sitting ducks. So what does that mean? Like, why does it position us in that sitting duck position?
Well, I think number one, long-term care is not something that's discussed by most financial advisors, unfortunately. And this goes back to 97% of wealth is in the hands of white males. So, they don't have the longevity we have, and they're typically trained to gather assets under management and just put everything in the stock market because that's a really easy way to make money. And the conversations about long-term care don't even happen among a lot of financial advisors. I know, for example, that, Quantum as a risk management consulting firm partners with wealth advisors who handle assets under management every now and then when they think about long-term care. But long-term care is a discussion that should be being had with every single person. And there's a lot of myths out there like, oh, just self-insure. Well, the average claim for long-term care is going to be $1.3 million per person. And the average retirement assets people have today is like literally somewhere between $200,000 and $400,000 as a couple. So what's going to happen is there's going to be zero-sum situations where one partner gets sick, funds are depleted, whoever's left holding the bag, who lives longer, typically the female, will have nothing left. And even in the financial advisory world, this whole elephant in the room isn't even being addressed. And why we're sitting ducks is as women, we're disproportionately affected. We're even in charge of our own money now, but we're not in a mindset or a paradigm where this is a reality. So we can't be relying on what we think our dads or our uncles or even our typical financial advisor is telling us as far as planning for the future, because their interests aren't even aligned with our interests, which is to be able to grow old gracefully and have means and have protection.
Yeah. And so okay, so that is something, it's so important, right? With the long-term care, like we're going to be giving another presentation. I was going through all the statistics of like women will outlive men on average anywhere between 5 to 14 years. So on average, 10 years. So Chris, like what about that period of time specifically is so important for women to understand about health and how long-term care planning fits in?
It's such an amazing point that we need to educate women on, because what happens is they need to have a plan and do it ahead of time. So, for example, in my family's nightmare, my mom and dad, my husband handles that, right? And that's, somebody else handles, or your financial advisor handles it, but it's not even in the conversation. And so the idea is to have the conversation and make it comfortable and healthy and happy and empowering. So it's not a scary thing, because it's the exciting thing is that you can share with people that, look, you can stay in your own home. You can set up, tax-free resources or a way that will empower you instead of you're just going to die in a nursing home. So it changes the whole conversation instead of gloom and doom into something like, you got this. You just need to talk about it and then mind map it, right? Make the plan. If you go first, husbands or wives, they don't even, partners, they don't even talk about like what happens if you go first. My husband, he was like almost 20 years older than me. And I never really, and as a planner, I never thought about that. Oops, I never thought about that. And when he passed on, I was like, okay, I better, organize everything that I've been teaching people. So no matter how smart we are, we have to take a moment and have that conversation with our family, those around us, and our planners.
Yeah. It really is important. Even me, I even preparing for this and everything, I have a little bit of a pit in my stomach, because it's like, gosh, I really don't want to think about it. It's so emotional. And yet it's going to be 10 times more emotional when we're dealing with it and we're dealing with the financial stress of it. So it's we have to overcome the discomfort, like short-term gain, like
Exactly.
short-term pain for long-term gain, I suppose, is one way that we can think about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But my mommy came up to me. She had this paper in her hand and she had these tears. So it's the way of taking something devastating and challenging, because it almost makes me cry to share it. And she goes, honey, I want you to share this with your clients. And it was like, what is it, Mom? It was a bill from Stanford Hospital for 5 days of chemo, $90,000. She had chemo for a year. So $1 million is not a lot of money.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, well, I have a few million, I can self-insure. No, that's not the way you want to do it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
right. And so that's empowering. You can take that horrible thing and be empowered around it and say, okay, I'm going to share this with all my sisters, right? All my friends and family, right?
Yeah, it is really important. Nancy, what, like, from some, I know you've your whole experience, your new company is coming along from this. Like, what's been your experience? What, maybe some things that you've gleaned from that you could share?
Sure. I'm talking to a lot of people about this, and, it's not just the long-term care, but the cost of care and what's involved. And I want to share something, just a slightly different twist. My mom took care of all my dad and our family's household finances. From the day they got married, my dad gave my mom the checkbook and he says, I run the business, you run the house of the business. And that was it. Now, when she got dementia, we didn't know what was going on. And we found bills, checks everywhere. It was impressive. Let's put it that way. My parents did have long-term care. Their financial advisor had recommended it, but he was also doing some bad things elsewhere. The good thing is that he had recommended that. It was a good policy. It was a life, and long-term care policy, which benefited us. And it was very helpful. And we stacked how we used that for taking care of my parents. We used my dad's policy first till he passed. And there was, I think, $50,000 left in it. For every dollar that we used, a dollar came off the life policy. So there was no benefit at the end of his passing. When Mom needed it, I didn't know exactly the details of her policy, but it was significantly less, which was interesting. And I think it should have been actually the other way around, where my mom's policy should have been significantly larger to take care of her upon my dad. There was 10 years difference between Mom and Dad. But that was very helpful. The other thing I think that we also really need to be aware of is, if we're entrepreneurs or even in the corporate workforce, 40% of us or more will leave the workforce to take care of somebody. And that wipes out your income right then and there. So even if we're the breadwinners of the family, guess what? It becomes even more financially devastating. And those are big issues. And employers are now starting to say, well, we think it's larger because there are people who are not talking about it. 53% of employees won't even share that they're dealing with this for fear of retribution. And it does happen. I've got some pretty big horror stories. And if you look back, just even in the news and reports, somebody who worked for AARP declared that they had to declare bankruptcy as a result of taking care of an elderly parent. So there's a lot that goes on, and we can be accidentally, I say unintentionally, responsible for the finances of our parents based on the things that we sign and how we sign it. So knowing those little details are, I think, incredibly important, because this isn't an unknown. I mean, we're taught how to be parents, how to raise children to some extent. Some of us are better at it, some of us are not so good at it. But we're not told how to handle this more and it's aggressive. It's not gentler. It's an aggressive part of life, where the whole healthcare system looks at us as, I was trying to sell to somebody. I said, our parents are sort of like a rounding error in the form of scheme of things to the healthcare insurance world. Or I shouldn't say the insurance world, but the health system. And insurance like this is going to be beneficial, even if it's just a little bit. Every little bit counts.
Yeah. No, that's it. It's so important. And also for many of us, 10,000 people a day turn 65. This, the baby boomer generation, it's going to put a massive strain on healthcare, Social Security. These are all really
And the percentage of people out there that are younger than us, the younger population is shrinking.
Yes.
So when you think about, the rising scale here and the number of caregivers going down here, we have a problem.
We do.
A massive problem. And most people don't want to go into a care facility. Even the fancy ones that are designed like the Ritz, guess what? They are not hospital facilities.
Oh, no.
No. Yeah. My firm invests in senior housing facilities, and it's really truly like an operating business. And it's also really hard to find people to work there. That's a big challenge that is happening right now, is finding people who are willing to do that work.
Typically one aide for every 17 residents.
Yeah.
Versus doing this in your home. We had 6 aides. I had a team of 6 to 8. I worked from 1,200 miles away, and it worked well. I mean, but I called it Mom and Dad Inc. I ran the business of Mom and Dad's life and well-being.
Yeah.
Financially rebuilding their wealth and making sure that they were taken care of, and that we used the policy that they had well.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of that, I wanted to ask, Jennifer, we had a question here around, what are the first 3 steps that you would recommend to prepare for long-term care? And I would love for you to pick up on long-term care insurance, because we can even have 5, maybe if we're lucky, like 10 million by the time we retire, but that's going to go really, really quickly if we're spending a couple $100,000 or more a year on medical.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing comes down to, do you want to use all your retirement nest egg for this worst part of your life? Or do you want to be able to use your retirement income and all that fun that you hoped to have with part of the money you put aside, and let the insurance carrier cover the risk, or at least a part of the risk, for the part that's going to be the most depleting and the least fun to your and your family's overall wealth bucket? Because honestly, it's really silly not to do that. It's just so silly, because if you're young enough and healthy enough, and that typically would be any time between the ages of, let's say, 35 and 60 max. Okay. Most women are able to get some sort of really great policy that will pay handsomely for long-term care needs, be that traditional long-term care, which you can look into. There's pros and cons to that. If you're older, it might be better because the premiums aren't guaranteed and they increase over time, but you're closer to when you might need it. If you're younger, sometimes it's better to take a life insurance product with a hybrid long-term care rider built in, because you have all this other time for that policy to grow and work on your behalf and get you other benefits like, cash-free retirement income. And there are all kinds of hybrid products kind of coming out now on the market, because long-term care is such a big issue. And honestly, I mean, just for example, okay, I have a policy that I started 5 years ago. It's growing millions of dollars of retirement income for me, and I only put $500 a month into it. And it's going to have long-term care and death benefit tied together. It's not that hard. I mean, if we think about where we put money into our 401k, most of us are putting at least that or more into our 401k, sometimes not even getting matched. So it's just a question of whether you get educated and you do a mind shift. And if you access good information and get into some kind of policy, a well-structured, correct policy, you want to make sure you're working with someone really good before all this hits the fan, right? Because that's all, we can do. We can't change the fact that 3 out of 4 people are going to get old and sick and keep living and not die.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, that's just life. But what we can change is the amount of options we have at the time that inevitably happens. And it's all about not putting our heads in the sand. So, I mean, I could talk about product all day. Of course, this is what we do. But I think if I want anyone to take something away, it's just take your head out of the sand, because what's so sad to me is it's all preventable, easily preventable.
Right. Yeah. And I know, Chris, you have several webinars, and I was watching them, and you have this whole webinar with the alligators, and you even put the 401k as an alligator, right? The stock market, because it's a full risk on proposition, right? It goes up and it goes down, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you can smooth out the years, but when you look at the way the stock market actually works, it's not this big be all and end all of retirement income. So can you speak to that a little bit, and why, again, it's really important because we are trained and taught and marketed to so much about 401ks in the stock market. But what these policies, my understanding of these policies is that they are actually the thing that we want, but nobody tells us.
Exactly. And the 401k is like a dinosaur, right? Or it's dying. It's a big tax bomb because you're going to be taking it out at ordinary income. And this is just because I've done this for 3 decades and seen thousands of portfolios. I saw this vision of, it was like a roulette wheel. It'll be up or down when I retire. So I have that risk, and I don't like that feeling. I don't like that uncertainty. I want to know my money's going to be there. And that's one. And then the tax bomb, that the money that is going to be taken out is at ordinary income. So, if you have a million or 100,000 and, the taxes are going to be taken out, you really don't have that. And so when you're planning your income, because when you get in your 3rd and 4th quarter life, that's when you want to take income. You're going to take your chunks of money and have them pay you, which will double and triple the money that's there. So if you leave your money in risk, then you're in the roulette wheel. That's one. 2, the taxes. P.S. We are in one of the lowest tax times, and they're raising the taxes. Okay. And then the massive volatility of, will it be there or won't it be there? So those are the 3 kind of fired up things that people should be aware of, where you can take that same money, and there's another thing for another time where you can actually convert that as you fund the IUL or whatever it is you're getting, and the death benefit pays the taxes. And that's a whole other downline that Jennifer will talk about. But there's fabulous things. Now, I do say, if your company's matching 4%, then put the 4% in because you get the match. But then you could take the other out and contribute it to these really nice hybrid products that are going to create the income that you're going to want in 3rd and 4th quarter life, tax-free.
Yeah.
With long-term care, right?
Yeah, and with guarantees, I think, Chris, I love that you talk about the roulette wheel, because that's something that I feel like so few people talk about. I know from my own hand, my very first job, I was 23 in LA. I mean, it was my first job. It was my first job in LA. But this guy came and he just talked about, as long as you put in your 401k, you'll be a millionaire. Right. And I bought in on that entirely. But what they don't say is, it might be up, it might be down. If it's down like it is right now, you've lost 20, 30% of your entire nest egg bucket. And they definitely don't talk about the taxation on any of that. And yet so few people understand that there are so many other ways of doing all of this. And that's why I think we've wanted to kind of claim and take ownership of the thought leadership in this, especially because women are really working their butts off and are the ones to be impacted. And I think we've relied far too long a little bit on the idea that those 97%ers really know what they're doing and are guiding us properly, because I've seen too much to believe that at this point.
Yeah. Exactly. That's bullseye. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we've been through, 3 unprecedented things in the past, like less than 15 years, right?
Right.
The great financial crisis. We had the pandemic, and now we're having a series of bank failures and treasury market failures. So what is safe?
History likes to repeat itself, doesn't it?
So quickly, though, it's accelerating. It is. And you see the manipulation in the markets more and more.
Yes.
So it really makes you question, like, what is safe? Like, treasuries just failed. What's safe? So anyway, so that's like a whole other thing. But these are the things, we see them, and we probably, maybe to some degree, I wonder if anybody in the audience too is thinking this, like, maybe I'm not supposed to say that, hey, it looks like the financial system's not exactly what everybody said it was made out to be, because who am I to say that, et cetera. No, what you're seeing and what you're probably sensing is 100% correct.
Exactly.
And so this is why this conversation really at this time, especially, is so important. But Nancy, I wanted to ask you a question. This is from Elise. I wonder if you or have experience, or anyone you've worked with parents who are in denial or even sabotage your efforts. Financially or even like health wise, and how have you handled it?
This is a conversation I had with another colleague not too long ago, and she said, "Nance, look at my mom is in pretty good shape. She's not old, but she's in her late 60s, is what she said, maybe early 70s. They still travel. She's in fairly rather good health, which is great, but you don't know when something's going to happen." So just to precursor to that story, another friend just had her mom just passed away unexpectedly in her early 70s, coming back home from a yoga class with her friend, and dropped right on the street of a massive stroke. And she passed two weeks later. But that's a hard conversation. And there are a lot of people out there who believe that it's bad juju. You don't talk about those kinds of things. So in this particular case, what I said to this gal is like, you have a child, right? An adult. She says, I have an adult child her son's a special needs, not quite severe, but he needs a little help. And I said, and you're doing some planning for yourself and your son, right? She says, yep. I said, take your mom out for dinner, lunch, coffee, whatever, and say, Mom, I want you to know what I'm doing with Johnny. And that's important to me because if anything happens to me, I want you to be aware of what those plans are. And I want you to be part of that discussion. Have you thought about this yourself? So it takes the responsibility off of her and the fear and pressure. And some parents will think, Nancy's just after my money, or Johnny's just after my money, and they just want to see us like 6 feet under. And those are real fears. So I just say, take the pressure off of them, put it on you. I'm worried about my family and I need your guidance. What would you do? Can we bring you into this story? And what have you done? It's just a simple, soft discussion. So it's not pointing fingers. It's not putting up walls. It's not frightening anybody. And you don't do it all at once.
Nice.
That is utterly brilliant. I wanted to say that sometimes it's too late for parents. If they're too old to get a product, for example, you can't. Or if they don't have the money, they may just not have the money. So,
but you want to know where their assets are.
Well,
and you want to know where the hidden bank accounts are.
Yes.
I heard of somebody whose dad had 23 different bank accounts, and he opened them individually because when he couldn't figure out how to balance things far enough and it got out of hand, he opened up another account. Yeah. And he kept opening another account, and he kept opening another account, 23 different accounts. Now that's chaos. And you don't want anything like that ever happening. But just even understanding, where their assets are, sharing what you're doing, where your finances are. Money itself is a taboo that we don't talk about. And just having the conversation of, so, what are you going to do if you're the only one that's paying the bills, Dad, and Mom doesn't know where the checking account is? Why don't you just let me help you help her?
Yeah, I was going to say, so there's certain things, there's certain things you may not be able to change, right? Like, and your idea is brilliant, Nancy, and it probably will work in 80-90% of situations, and at the very least, you can get them to say, can you at least just help me create an in the event of emergency folder, where we at least know where all the life insurance policies are, any long-term care policies are, just so we all know where that is, God forbid. Everyone needs to have one of those, no matter what age you are, right? Everyone needs to have that. And the other thing I was going to say is when there's an impasse, when there's, my dad was not insurable at all and stubborn as a brick. Okay. And he had a stroke and he's been in a Medicaid facility now because that was the only way. He used all of his money up. It was $10,000 a month for around the clock care at home. It ran out very quickly. And the Medicaid facility is awful. I buy him clothes. They're gone the next time, no matter how much I've labeled him. I get him an iPhone. It's gone the next day. He's miserable there. It's 3 people to a room, but this is all that was possible for him, right? But what you can do is take care of anyone else. So get your own act in order, get your own house in order, get your own protection, because the more there's protection in place, then anyone who couldn't or wouldn't get their part of the neighborhood cleaned up doesn't have as much collateral damage. But when you think about everyone who doesn't have their back covered. And then, a parent didn't lay ground for you to be safe. And then you also weren't, then this devastating cycle, and actually a devastating cycle of poverty and loss ensues. So what you have to look at is like risk mitigation and containment whenever there are those intractable people, and definitely keeping your own part of the equation as prepared as possible.
And open the conversation. I mean, really, it comes down to being able to talk about things, to share, to be not a, I call it PITA, pain in the what, because I think that parents and even as kids, like, oh, you're just like, like, don't go there. It's an open and gentle conversation that takes time. And, my parents' bill went from $3,500 a month in a care facility to $30,000 a month. And when that happened, I mean, I knew where the assets were, I know what was going on. I started to add things up very quickly and was always on the care facility. And every time I got a bill, I was like, what's this for? What's this for? I called myself the Wicked Witch from the North because I'd fly down from Connecticut down to Florida. Always be on them. They had nicknames too. But when I sat my dad down, who didn't have memory issues, I said, Dad, look, we need to have this conversation. And we would always have business conversations over the course of my life and his life. And he says, oh my God, can we leave now? It's like, no, this is the plan. This is what we're going to do. Do you want to come with me to look at some other places? And then we eventually move them to one place that was significantly less and lovely quality, but I had my own aides that I had hired at that point. And then we bought a house. So buying a house and running your own, I'll call it agency, which is what I did inside of their home with the support of long-term care, was not only taking care of them, increasing the quality of their life and well-being, but we also had an asset now on top of it that was invested. And yes, their long-term care did take a lot of the burden off with the aids and other things that we were dealing with. So it was the whole package was the discussion that we had to look at, and planning. It's risk mitigation. But if you don't know where the buckets are, you don't know which one's going to turn into a black hole.
So Nancy, you actually answered a question I was going to ask you as you were talking about all of this, is that you can, and for all of you, so you can use long-term care for anything, even if you're buying an asset and having like your own version of like a facility, so to speak. Like, so
it depends upon the policy. Most policies kick in when there are, I think it's 3 of the 5 daily chores of life. So it's bathing, dressing, toileting, transferring, and meals. Can you feed yourself? So those are the 5. And Jennifer, you can chime in on that. But it depends upon the policy, and not all policies, from my understanding, will actually cover some of those, like the care facility. If it's not a medical facility, they won't cover it in many cases. So you have to understand that a long-term care facility is not a medical institution. Assisted, independent, memory is even not considered medical in many cases. It's a nursing home is medical, rehab is medical, and that's covered also by insurance. But aids, we were able to use the long-term care policy to cover the cost of, or part of the cost of our aids. My dad policy covered, I think it was about $1,900 a month. It didn't cover everything. I had round-the-clock care. And when one parent was in the hospital, I made sure an aide was always there, period. No parent was ever alone in a hospital. That's a big recommendation for everybody. Never leave your parents alone or anybody alone in a hospital at all. Accidents happen. I can tell you horror stories that you don't even want to know about. But, and then the other one is that when the other one was home, we always had an aide there too. So that doubled our cost during those times. But it $1,800, almost $1,900 a month helped. When Dad passed, Mom's was down to only $1,000. She still had 24/7 care. So it's not like the cost really dropped.
Right. Yeah. So
but it was a benefit. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's really good. That's really good to know. This last point that you brought up, I actually want, Chris, because you were saying, Nancy, like your dad had the bigger policy and not your mom. And yet between the wealth gap and the pay gap, we are going to be millions short of what a male partner would be, or just men in general. And yet we outlive. So I'm wondering, like, Chris, like, I know you structure trusts and things for people. Like, how important is that? It's millions of dollars important. Can you speak to that a little bit about, we need this level of wealth really to be able to do the things that Nancy so brilliantly has figured out, like this really strategic way to like kind of like have it all, but to be able to take care of what is a big thing. Like that is a big thing. No wonder women have to leave the workforce. So just to acknowledge Nancy, like that's incredible, like all the strategy around it. I love strategy, so it's super interesting to me. But then I wanted to pop it over to Chris and just talk about that. I mean, that gap is massive.
It is massive. And this is really a great panel because Nancy's like on the one end and I was on the other end, actually, because my parents went through millions of dollars self-insured by paying it out. Then I never looked at, and I never had that conversation. My dad was so private. I had to look into his drawers and look how much money, and the shock of, oh my gosh, I have to pay for this. I have to figure this out. And I was so embarrassed to even look at my dad. If, it was so emotionally hard to go and look at how much money he had and then figure it out. And then the creative planning, this is what we need a course on it. How to do it when you don't have the money. I ended up, I found a certified CNA, FBI, fingerprint approved care, and $10 an hour, full-time care, 24 hours a day, 70,000 a year in 2016, in Northern California. So then I had to get the creative planning of that. And so it's a neat thing. It's a balance here because Nancy's on one end and I was on one end, then went to the other end. The importance to answer your question is that you can create these things. And that's what Jennifer was talking about. These funds can, even with $500 a month, depending on your age and how they're structured, that wealth can be created inside of these insurance policies that honestly are one of the safest places right now with the money. They're the last to go as things start to fall apart, really. So you can build that long-term wealth. And you can do it for future generations, and you can do it for your children that are really going to need help. So it's a whole synchronicity where it can cover the long-term care and the gaps that you're going to need to fill in for all of that, right?
Yeah, and to your point, Chris, I think we put it in the chat, but there's different, part of the reason you, Nancy, were able to do what you were doing was you had a hybrid policy, which is amazing, that was cash. Just pure cash for any purpose. So that gives you so much flexibility. And it's also not the hassle of submitting reimbursements and receipts and everything, which is a really, really nice thing. If you can, a lot of the hybrid policies today are just pure cash. And then another thing I want to mention is it's not just IUL, right? There's traditional long-term care policies. There's pros and cons to those. There's IUL, which is fantastic when you build it with a rider with long-term care. There's even annuities now. Annuities, and some of the annuities right now with interest rates going up, the caps on the interest rates are like 9 and 10%, which is pretty dang good, and there are annuities in certain states where if it's because of long-term care that you are annuitizing, you double the annuity income. So it's called an income doubler, or some even have an income tripler feature. So that's another way that you can get a cash-based long-term care kind of contingency plan. And the nice thing with annuities is, especially for older people, annuities don't have to be medically underwritten. So if you have any conditions and your parents, they can be 70 and 80 people. A lot of people are taking retirement income out and putting it into annuities now because they're not ready to retire or start living off at age 65, and they need to create another 30 years of income stream. So this is the world we're in, especially Chris and I, and Nancy, you're on the other side of this with brilliant empathy and insight about the machinery and how vast this issue is. The key is just know that these things are out there. Just know that there's all kinds of complexity. And when it comes to the stability, life insurance carriers, they have some of the biggest real estate holdings on the planet. Because basically they take their profits and put it in real estate. So they're very, very solid. It's very different from stock markets where it's really all self-relative, like a tech stock is up 40% and then it's lost $30 billion the next day. Life insurance companies tend to back what they own in hard assets, which is another really reason that the money is so different and so stable in comparison, and why they can offer the kinds of guarantees that they do.
I think what you have to understand here is, and what we're really saying is that the business of caring for yourself or a loved one as they age is a business. There's a strategy, there are tactics, there's assets to be managed, and there's a balance sheet. And understanding that first now gives you the ability to sort of back into things gently when you need to have those conversations. There's a book by Atwal Gawande called Being Mortal that I highly recommend to anybody. And it goes over some of these conversations. It doesn't mention the assets, but that's critical. And you have to also understand, if you're a caregiver for anybody, and a caregiver is not necessarily technically a nurse or a doctor or CNA. It's those of us who are taking care of mom or dad or ourselves or our spouse or a partner or a loved one. It's not a title we tend to give ourselves because we think it's, oh, that's them, not us. But we can unintentionally become financially liable for somebody else's expenses. And you have to know what to sign, how to sign it, so that doesn't happen to you.
I actually wanted to ask a quick question. It might be related. And this is because I watched something on Netflix like a while ago where there's this fraud around people becoming a state appointed.
Was this the movie I Care a Lot?
Or maybe it's a movie. I'm not, no, that too. No, it was a real thing that happened to this woman. And I think she's still basically like a prisoner of the state, and they take all her money and like, I know it's not really long-term care, but can any of you speak to that a little bit? Like how to avoid that happening?
Well, it happened to a gentleman in the next town over from where we lived up in Connecticut, and the town took over. He had fallen, and he was alone. Nobody was there to take care of him. He was in the hospital. Somebody, I'll say, squealed on the situation, right? And told the town, and somebody in the town came and took his ass, sold his house. Sold his house from underneath him, and took that money and said, well, now you're going to be taken care of by the state in this care facility against his will.
Yeah.
Now that can happen. It happens on rare occasions, but if you are considered mentally incompetent, and somebody thinks that you're not safe, there are state agencies and authorities and in communities that will do that. Now there are pros and cons to some of this too. So this is a horrible situation, and not one I take lightly. But there was a gentleman that I knew who said he hated his mother, absolutely hated her. She was the most horrible person on the face of the planet. His sister hated her. His dad hated her. The woman had been alone by herself for years, and she was not. She had no assets to her name, and he was an entrepreneur and kept giving her money. And he said, "She's a ball and chain. She's a black cloud on me. What do I do?" And I said, well, is there any assets there you want? Like, nope. Your sister? Nope. Your dad? Any other family member? Nope. She could rot in hell. We could care less. Horrible story, right? And I said, well, here's the deal. If you don't want any responsibility for her at all, you may want to talk to a court-appointed guardian and have them take care of her. Not what I would ever want to do, but he said, thank you. This was the best for me. Now, she may get better care.
I want a PS in there too. That's why you need your living trust set up, because inside of a good comprehensive living trust is the guardianship and conservatorship. So if you become incapacitated, you already have your family or friends set up so the government doesn't come in.
And if you have special needs children, my sister recently set up a special needs trust for her son, and the assets are there for him and will not be taken away. And there is a professional conservatorship and guardianship to make sure that when they pass, he has the assets to make sure that he is taken care of properly.
Exactly.
Those are critical.
It's so important. And you have it. And you have that already with the agencies, you give your doctor the power of attorney for healthcare ahead of time. So if something happens randomly, your family's not running around. It's all set up. You set it up ahead of time. This is the whole idea, right, of this conversation. You
Yeah.
set this up ahead of time inside your trust and with a good money plan, right? Safe.
Yeah, I'm going to
money
add just
plan.
one more to that too. Just when we're talking about long-term care, and if you're in a care facility, please, one of the things that we do is we review contracts of care facilities so people understand what they're getting into and how to ask questions and where the bills can escalate or where they might not be an issue. But one contract I looked at for somebody, the 89-page contract actually said, you sign over all your medical and financial rights to us.
Whoa.
And she didn't know this. I said, look, if you read this contract, if you read this
Geez.
exactly as it's saying, they have the right, first of all, they have the right to actually go collect money and raise money in their not-for-profit arm, which it was a large, fancy, you pay $800,000 to get in and then ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching there later on. They had the right to actually collect assets under her name and use them any way they wanted to. Then the right to actually make medical decisions for her, period.
Yikes.
So those are things that we have to understand. And that's where also long-term care comes into play, because now you know what's being taken care of, what's not being taken care of. And I mean, it's a very complicated part of life that we don't know about. We don't want to talk about it. We're afraid of. And the whole long-term care policy. I mean, Jennifer, you're an expert in this. This business has evolved over the last, 20 years or so, to when actuaries didn't even know that we'd live this long. Well, I'm glad that we're living this long. I mean, myself, I want to be to the 120 that my dad said he wanted to get to and couldn't get there and be still viable. But in reality, body parts start breaking down.
All very true. All of this is so true. I know these are horror stories. I just want to emphasize that
There's some really good stuff out there too, right?
There really are easy and safe solutions. I think it's just that no one's doing them. Almost no one's doing them. It bugs me that sometimes it feels like shouting into the wind. It's like everyone needs a durable power of attorney. Everybody, even if you own more than $200,000 total, you need a trust. Or and by the way, there are attorneys that can do it, and it's really expensive. And Chris has an amazing business that allows you to do all of those things without even having to pay attorney fees, which is one of the reasons I respect you so much, Chris. And then to your point, Nancy, what you do is when the stuff is hitting the fan and people are in it, it's easy to talk about it right now, all in the realm of theory, but it's very, very emotional and overwhelming because there's also emotion in all of this. People are losing or losing connection with loved ones who have been the ones who've been in charge forever. And there's things like fights among siblings and disagreements, which is
and it impacts our health too, our mental, our physical, and our emotional health. And if we're business owners, there's time. I mean, it's one thing if you're an employee of a larger corporation. But if you're running the show yourself, that's hard, and I told clients, I said, listen, your stuff will get done. I just need 24 hours. This is where I am. And please understand, I was very open. Not everybody is.
Yeah.
And if they didn't like it, I was like, that's a client I don't need later on. Next.
Next.
So, so we're just coming up on time. We have 4 more minutes, and
wow.
It's flew by. That's why I wanted to jump in so quickly. So I did want to give just like a couple minutes to Nancy and Chris, and then of course to Jennifer too, to just wrap up. Nancy, I know you have a book. Chris, I would love for you to talk a little bit about what Jennifer kind of teed up about what you do, because it's so special. And so we'll start with Nancy, and then we'll go around.
Sure. I have a book that I'd like to recommend to everybody, and it's not just for me. This was really written for everybody who has a family, period. Whether you've got kids or not, at some point you're going to call 911. This takes you through the steps of what to do from even before you call 911 all the way to the end of discharge in the hospital, what to sign, what not to sign, how to get better care, and even how to call 911 when the 911 system goes down. And they do go down. So that's important. I have a podcast called Elder Care Success. You can go to eldercaresuccess.live, or it's on every single platform. If you just type in Elder Care Success, it's going to pop up. And then if you need to reach me, I'll put my email in there. It's nam@caremanity.com. And then I consult with individuals on just how to do this to make sure that you're not physically, emotionally, or financially drained yourself.
Thanks, Nancy. Yes, put it in the chat, please, for everyone. And then we'll also include your details in the follow-up email. So, Chris?
Thank you so much. Nancy, you'll be a great guest on my Money 911 podcast.
I love it.
That'll be fabulous. I have a #1 best-selling book called Ready for Pre-Retirement. Plan retirement early, right? That's what we're talking about. 3 secrets for safe money and a fabulous future. So we've talked about, we really drilled down on the one, catastrophic illness. And I'm a legacy wealth strategist. So I do financial fitness strategy sessions, and I focus on those 3 things: protection of assets from catastrophic illness, long-term care, and the Great Recession. And I just hop on the phone. You could meet with chrismiller.com, and there's no charge, and I can just, answer a few questions or help you. We do living trusts at, as I said, over 6,000 revocable living trusts, and never had a problem. They work. They're great. And they're so important. Just like Jennifer said, you don't have to have a lot of money to get them. And they have the health care and the financial in them. Everything's so important. So you can reach out to me, meet with Chris Miller, KRISMiller.com to hop on a great chat. And my podcast is Money 911, available everywhere. Also have videos of it too on the C-Suite Network. And you can also call my office at 951-926-4158. And I really appreciate, this is so important. And I hope we could develop an actual, this is the thing that I felt like I needed. There's nobody to talk to when it's so emotional. Even now I could start crying. There's no one to talk to go through this, to have like this program that fits in right here. This is a missing piece that really can help so many people. So I'm so glad we're talking.
Well, hang tight. We're working on one of those ourselves.
Really is. It really is. Chris, make sure that you put all that information in the chat too, and then we'll obviously we'll include it in the email. And appreciate both Nancy and Chris so much. And so Jennifer, last thing, I know what the answer is to this question, but at what age do you think people should buy long-term care policies?
Well, it depends if you're going to do
5
right now.
If you're going to do a hybrid policy, 25 is not too young, because then you'll just build your own retirement legacy kind of plan. And if you're 65 and you're female, you should still look. Honestly, if you're 65 and up, you should be looking at annuities. It's a whole conversation. So similarly to the 2 ladies here, anybody who wants to reach out can reach out to Quantum. And my company is www.quantuminsuranceservices.com. And we're specifically in that one risk management product piece, and we can help look at all those strategies. And we do work with a lot of professionals. So even if you have financial advisors or attorneys, we can help on that one piece, on the product piece, and optimizing it for everyone's particular situation. And certainly, Chris, I'm going to be looking forward to sending a lot of people your way and collaborating with you, and Nancy, you as well. I'm really grateful that we were able to facilitate this today. This is something very, 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 very rewarding to try to get good information out for as many women as we can, and men too. Right. But this was something that, felt like we moved the needle a little bit today on the education curve. So thank you.